right. Good afternoon, everyone. I guess it's still good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming to our third meeting of the General Plan Advisory Committee. Diane has graciously set us up with lunch again. This time we've got pizza and salads coming, I think, here in a little bit. So if you're hungry, that will be taken care of here shortly. Couple logistical things. We do have 2 microphones this time, which should make everyone's lives a little bit easier since we were trying to do a very long-armed shuffle last time we were here. So, but just a quick reminder on Bill's behalf to please make sure you've got the microphone before you start speaking, because Diane's trying to scribe the notes, and it will help us in making sure we've got all the feedback captured. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and jump in. I think the primary purpose of today's meeting is to continue our discussion from October, where we covered the initial sections of the general plan draft. We now have a complete draft of the general plan, but what we sent you in your packet is just the new material. So we didn't want to overwhelm you with new versions of old stuff at this point. So basically what we're going to focus the meeting on today is just these 4 new chapters. And so what we did last time that seemed to work pretty well is we'll kind of just take it chapter by chapter and go around the room and seek some feedback on each of those. I'll give you a quick overview, just kind of what's changed, what you might want to focus on for each of the chapters before we dive in. But the primary purpose of this group is really just to get into some of the details that we're not able to, with the community at large in the public meetings. So with that, any questions or comments on the agenda? Anything else? Okay. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started on that then? And we'll start with the growth management chapter. And this section, a lot of it, is kind of fundamental to the 2002 plan. Not a lot of changes here, but I think really more that we've separated it from the land use discussion, because this is really a precursor to getting into the land use plan. This is sort of where are we encouraging growth, how are we dealing with water, those types of issues in the growth management section. So we talked with this group early on about some of the issues in this section, everything from the urban containment boundary, public lands and leases, those types of things. But this section also includes the new energy element that's required. So there's some verbiage in there that wasn't in the old plan related to encouraging solar and other types of renewable energy. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to you guys and dive into comments and questions on this section. Okay.
Just dive right in.
Well, no, I have made little notes there.
Sure, Dorothy's got some questions.
I've lived here 17 years, and I'm glad to see that they're finally going to try to do more with solar energy, the small wind generators and things like that. And in my opinion, they should have done this 15 years ago. And I'm hoping that they will really get the solar energy off the ground more.
Doug's got a comment down there.
I don't know if this is the place to debate policy, but I think it is, or at least bring it up. If you turn to page 14 of the draft document, it talks about public land leases. And I know that we act according to how we're directed by outside agencies, and in this instance we're talking about the state land department. And on the island in particular, how we're kind of hamstrung by their ownership of the island and their leases. And I know, having worked in other destinations where the property was leased on 99-year lease, 49-year lease, whatever else, and in this case we're talking about even shorter leases, that while that might generate the best short-term income for state land, it does not generate the kind of ownership in the property and the kind of development that may be best, since that really is a centerpiece resort part of our community. And I don't know how this would be talked about, but it seems to me like we ought to look at trying to get state land off the island altogether, and perhaps other parts of our community that are deemed important land parcels, and have the ability to provide fee simple ownership to whoever might turn around and develop it, whether it's the city or preferably private industry.
Okay. I think one of the themes throughout, it's a very valid point. It's a constraint to land in different parts of the community. I think one of the things that the policies in the general plan try to do is really encourage a, kind of a more proactive partnership with those agencies to, those discussions could take any number of turns, as you know, but I think we're certainly encouraging ongoing discussion about that, and not, less of a wait and see attitude, but try to tackle that. What do others think about that concept, and is that how far should the city be looking at that, Jim?
I personally echo everything Mr. Traub just said. Look at the island itself as it is now. We have two critical properties that are both in complete limbo right now, partly because they themselves didn't jump on the bandwagon of getting the help that the city did in lobbying to help those same leases. And yet in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been no redevelopment or improvements made on those properties because of the same limbo problem of the short-term lease fiasco. I would hope that we could find a way to not just encourage, but find a way to require the city to enter into these negotiations, knowing that it's far beyond the general plan's purview, but I think more than encouragement should be in the general plan to try to require or spur that negotiation on. Nothing's going to happen there on a scale that we think we want unless we resolve that
Sure.
problem.
So one question for you guys on that. You mentioned the short-term nature of the leases. So if it were a longer-term lease, does that alleviate some of the issue? Or just trying to figure out, is there kind of a middle ground there that would be a step in the right direction? Is that?
Well, the easy answer is if you were looking at buying a property in Lake Havasu and you could only own it for 10 years, how much house would you build?
Right.
So the commercial property works the same way. I don't know what the magic number is or how many hundreds of millions come with that much time, but fee simple property is yours and you can develop it, and that would bring the big boys in if we decide we want the big boys.
One of the problems with saying we ought to enter into negotiations, that requires two people or two agencies. State Lands is many times not interested in talking to us at all.
The irony is we have a place like London Bridge, which around it, those parcels are owned by individuals, and we have no control over how they're developed, but the marketplace in some ways dictates how they'll go. But there is an opportunity for VRE, for instance, to come up with something, or with the folks over at London Bridge Resort, to eventually, when the market dictates it, to develop those to a higher level of where they are now. Whereas on the island, which is, was created to be a resort island, we do not even, as you were just saying, Jim, 5 or 10 year lease doesn't. So if there's a way for the city to somehow get to where we could get a state law, and I don't know if this belongs to the general plan or what, but it should go to looking to a long-term ownership. In the best case scenario, in the middle ground to me would be is, you look at something like the marina, and there's so many improvements that upscale is our vision plan for the city calls for, upscale first-class resort. That's what it says right in the very opening paragraph of our vision statement for the community. There's so many services that it should be offering, could be offering, and won't be offering, and especially now that we're going into another 5-year lease, it's just more of the same. And so at the very least, the middle ground to me would be the city not only, it shouldn't just be sitting on the sidelines, it should be, the planning department should be there dictating what our elements should be in the new lease that they're looking for from the owners to these properties. That would be like the worst possible scenario I could think of, but it's better than what we've got right now.
Well, it sounds like in terms of, and a lot of this is sort of what you're describing, are sort of the details of that we can't really get into in the general plan. But I think in terms of a general plan policy, what I'm hearing, and I'd like to hear from you guys as well, is sort of that the city would be, proactively pursuing a longer term strategy for ownership transition on the island. Is that accurate? Okay, and that could include any number of things that you've described. So, how about others on around the table? Anyone have other thoughts on that? Okay. Other comments, questions on growth management section?
Hi, Dan Kais. You know what? I've had an opportunity to live in other resort areas. Again, I've only been here for about 6 months. I'm extremely impressed with what I've seen here. But what I feel great about is that you're addressing in this plan some items and issues that I've seen other resort areas really struggle with. And I'll just name a few: is the steep slopes as well as the night skies. When I was in Whitefish, Montana, that was a battle because how much money was spent, beforehand trying to get everybody to convert, so on and so forth. And the fact that you're looking at this and this part of your growth policy is fantastic, because I think that you're ahead of the ball game to a certain extent. Also, somebody who has not lived in the desert Southwest before, I have to tell you that I drive around and I can't understand why everybody doesn't have a solar panel on their house, because it just makes sense. And so really, I think that's fantastic. You know what? And when I left here at the last meeting, I was talking with the individual, and I don't remember who that was anymore, but we talked about one of the things that we hadn't seen yet was the energy in general, about how we get our energy, where is it going to come from, and I see that we've got the renewable sources here, but gosh, I think energy is going to become more of an issue as we move into the future, and certainly this is one way to do it, but I think that there's a broader scope that we have to look at as well.
Okay. Other comments on this section? Okay. Why don't we jump into land use? I know there's going to be a lot of discussion on that section. And just a little bit of context for you here. This is a section, I think, probably one of the ones that's expanded the most or changed the most by virtue of several things. I think there's been a lot of work that was done in the city since the last general plan was adopted in 2002. Whether it's zoning work or the RUDAT happened, there were some vision discussions related to that, and a lot of discussions and ongoing work in different parts of the community. And so what we've tried to reflect here is sort of reinforcing the different character areas in the community, whether it's downtown, the island, the shoreline, in sort of breaking out different policies and goals related to each of those areas. And while there are more detailed plans that address those areas, it's really important that the general plan reinforces that to the extent that it can, and kind of ties all those pieces together. So that was one of the things, I think, just to give you a little bit of context. And the other thing, for those of you who weren't at the last meeting, that used to be in the land use plan but has now kind of has its own chapter. We talked a lot about housing and neighborhoods in October, and so there's if you're looking for kind of detail on that, be aware that that's a standalone chapter now, and so we did spend a lot of time talking about that. Trying to think if there's other, but I think the other theme I would say that kind of runs through this relates to a little bit what you guys were just talking about in terms of the collaborative, the need for collaborative planning. That's obviously been something that the city has kind of had to do for a long time, but I think there's an opportunity there to be more proactive in that area, to strengthen and kind of move some of these things forward. And also to address some of the new uses in town, like ASU and the campus, and kind of what opportunities that provides. So that's just a little bit of a high-level overview of that section. And then getting into the map, which we can we'll hit the goals and policies first, and then maybe circle back to the map. So let's start with goals and policies first on the land use section. If someone wants to jump in.
I had a question.
Oh, Dean, hold on. Jim, can you pass that, please? Thank you.
I had a question on page 22 under land use compatibility. On the last sentence there, it says additional compatibility issues between rural development and new development relating to animal and equestrian uses in some portions of the planning area neighborhoods remain a challenge. Could somebody explain that to me? There are no challenges. I live there.
This was a comment that came out of our very first public meeting. I'm glad you brought it up because we haven't heard it since, and so honestly, we've wondered how big of an issue it was, and so I was curious. Yeah, that's something we've wondered, but it came out of the public comments in one of our early public meetings that there were some questions about that. I think in the northeast part of the planning area. So what I'm hearing from you is not really.
Not at all.
Okay, not at all. Anyone else disagree or have other thoughts on that? Okay. Okay.
You know, I'll say first of all the comments I've made throughout this process, a great number of them, I know you've considered them, and I see them reflected in the documents, and I appreciate the conscientious and thorough review of what's been submitted, and also the opportunity to participate as anybody in this community has a chance to participate. But I'd like to talk to one thing I noticed that didn't quite get changed for other documents on page 22, and it's a very philosophical tenet that applies to the whole document that I think needs to be debated a little bit more, and that is McCulloch's original master plan and what his thought for this community was. I hear it said once in a while by folks that he conceived of this as a retirement community, and you see this specifically in page 22 under master planning in the second paragraph, where it's described as a recreational residential emphasis. Certainly that may have been part of the market he was looking at, but I think that he was looking at a resort community and a recreational community, and I think that when we start putting in words like retirement, that I think that that's pigeonholing us into an area that, while it's a great place to retire, it's not a retirement community. I don't think he planned it to be a retirement community. I planned it as a great place to retire, yes. But I would like to say, and maybe everybody, you can all override me and disagree, but I think any place we talk about retirement community, and this thing should be stricken, unless it's talked about in the general sense that it's a great place to retire, but it was never conceived of as a place to just Sun City. This is not going to be Sun City, and it's never going to be Sun City, I hope. So I would just say that that's a philosophical element that I think needs to be looked at here and throughout the whole document.
Other thoughts on that? Oh, sorry, Donna.
Okay, we're going to try again. Thank you. I know that retirement seniors, too, is out of our vocabulary. And one of the phrases that we use is active living adults, recreational area for active living adults. It covers everyone.
Over the last 10 years, we had been developing a sports complex for our youth, for our community, and I've been involved and seen a lot of younger adults come out and work with us, and that's always been a mantra that we've always said. This is not a place of a retirement community. It is a place where people come to retire, and the people who come to retire are not necessarily like Sun City, just like Doug said. Doug and I totally agree on this always. But they're also active adults in an older age. And so this community isn't just somebody that sits around in a senior center and knits. They get out there and they're active. So I'm totally behind the fact that it should be stricken.
Let's go to Dorothy, and then we'll shoot down to you, Mike. Yep.
Before I came here today, I wrote down some things, and I just wanted to read it to everybody now because this is my opinion. Because I'm 80 years old, I'm, going to be here till I, die. I'm not going anywhere else. But as I see the major problems in Lake Havasu, and I've been here 17 years, is of course our sewer, debt payment, the local bus system, air travel. When we came here in 1997, there was daily air service to Phoenix, bus service where you could call and be picked up in 20 minutes. The population at that time was around 35,000. With the growth in population, there is no longer public air service or a local bus service. The Havasu area transit expanded to the point with grants that when the grants ended, the city couldn't afford to fund it. Things didn't get better, they got worse for the local population. Everything is being done to make sure that tourism is promoted and that the visitors to Lake Havasu are treated well, so they will spend a lot of money. Please don't forget our senior retired population who have been encouraged over the years to reside here and the year-round residents. We should be as important as the tourists.
I'll say something. I don't think anybody's here saying that residents, especially seniors, are unimportant, and I hope that there's any suggestion at all to that effect. I retracted. That's not at all what we mean. And we already talked about the transportation section, I believe. Haven't we already covered that? So that's kind of outside of the scope of what we're talking about today. And yeah. But I mean, but when you talk about making this a better community for retirees and others to live here, that's what we're trying to do. And the byproduct of that is it makes it more attractive for visitors. And so that's what the Bureau is all about promoting, is making it a better place for all of us to live of any age. Now, maybe I won't see any retirees out on the skateboard park, but guess what? Their grandkids sure will enjoy it, and so maybe their own kids. So enough said on this subject.
Actually, Mike had a comment there, too.
All right, thank you very much. I couldn't agree more with your comments on the not being pigeonholed. I agree with that. As far as in specific terminology to retirement, and just as a point of clarification, because apparently I missed it before, you're going to have a separate chapter, or already do, pertaining to things like residential care facilities, group homes, women's domestic violence shelters, and things like that. Is that?
Talk about all housing issues in the Housing and Neighborhoods chapter. Which
We did talk
yeah.
about it at one of the other meetings, but then it would be put together into a separate chapter. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, and I'm happy to share. I've got extra copies I can share with you after the
Please
meeting.
do.
If it sounds like you haven't seen that
All
one
right,
yet.
thank
so,
you.
mhm.
I think this is a very sensitive topic, and I agree with Dorothy, and I also agree with Doug. As a philosophical discussion of who are we here for, what are we doing, we have to remember that the pioneers that came here 40 years ago are now retired, and they're not going anywhere either. And it's a shift for those people. That's probably, I'm guessing, a third of our population. But most of the retirees that are here are the ones recreating here. And they're not old, they're all in their 50s because they retired early from wherever they came from, and they've been attracted here to recreate. I never realized how that word is so important until Doug read it. It says retirement. It doesn't talk about a great place to retire, and I think that's an important philosophical point. Our recreation is so evidenced in so many things in our daily lives we take for granted, like the size of our garages. We don't have garages for cars, we have garages for our stuff because of our recreation habits. And I think it's so part of Havasu that it's part of everything we are, not just the retirees that live here, the people that work here, the people that move here to play and have fun, but it's part of everyone's life. I know teachers that are upset that they don't make money that they could be making if they worked in other places, but then they say, but I wouldn't be out on my boat at 5 PM anywhere else. So it is a part of just about everyone's life here. And I think that's, as the general plan needs to be an oversight of vision, so to speak, I think it would be important to really emphasize that. I didn't realize it until he brought it up.
Great. There are comments on the goals and the policies in the land use section. What about for the different character areas in the community? Do those feel like the right level of detail? Is that kind of accomplishing what it needs to in terms of reinforcing the community's vision in different parts of the community?
I didn't see anything wrong with it. I thought it was more of a restatement of what we'd gone through before. I did notice, though, that the areas between the infill portions of our city limits that are pre-planned all seem to be low-density residential of 1 density unit per acre or less. Is there provision to allow that to go to a higher number, like the quarter-acre lots or 3 to 5 density units per acre that we are used to seeing?
We're looking at the,
graph,
the
yes.
majority of the map is actually 2 to 4 units per acre. That's that kind of middle yellow color. So that's what, all the platted neighborhoods are 2 to 4, and that's the low-density designation that's always been in place.
That related to the land use section, but that was my only real concern with that.
Okay. Yeah, chapter, or page 33 of the land use chapter has the categories descriptions, and that's, yeah, that's how that relates. Does that answer your question, or does that raise more?
I just didn't want the general plan to restrict those, everything we know now to the city limits areas, to be restricted to only low density. I would hope that it would encourage just the expansion of what we also have already also, which would be the 3 to 5 density units per acre.
Okay, so it sounds like we may need to look at what the exact, the density range that exists, make sure it's aligned with what's on the ground, is what I'm hearing you say. Okay, okay. Hi, welcome, thank you. Other comments, questions? And Donna, we're actually in the land use chapter right now and kind of talking through that. Other comments or questions on land use section?
Is the map that we have here, how much different is that than the existing map?
Okay, why don't we jump to the map then? So if we start with, you've got 2 small maps in front of you. One of them is more of a overarching map of the whole planning area and community. So let's start there. Fundamentally, the map isn't dramatically different. However, we did make a few adjustments based on, you know, similar to Jim's note, things that we just saw that weren't on the ground, or this committee gave us feedback on some areas that, you know, this category just doesn't make sense anymore. So let me walk you through what some of those changes were. So one of them, the plan has a neighborhood commercial center designation currently, and it says these areas are not mapped. There weren't any neighborhood centers shown on the map, and it's really kind of intended to be a smaller scale, compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. You know, kind of a convenience store, just a little node of commercial. And what we realized through feedback from this group and just kind of scoping these areas out a little more, talking with Stu, along the upper loop of McCulloch, you can see there's 2 kind of pink nodes there. Those used to be shown as mixed-use commercial nodal, which was actually a much higher intensity commercial. And so that just didn't seem to make sense based on what we were hearing from the community. And so what we're proposing is to designate those as neighborhood commercial, just to kind of reflect that though that's really what was intended to occur there within the neighborhood like that. Any questions or thoughts on that particular change? Okay. Another change along Highway 95, kind of, if you look at the Sarah Park label just to the west of that, you can see the kind of arc along 95 where a lot of the commercial uses are. That area was also designated as mixed-use commercial nodal, and when we say nodal, it's you know, the intent of the plan initially as we read it was it's really kind of a cluster. It's, you know, kind of a compact and higher intensity type of commercial. And the feedback we had heard was that, you know, call a spade a spade. That's really not what's happening in that area. It's probably not going to happen in that area. Should we just call it commercial? And so what we've proposed for that area is a more, a standard commercial designation. That being said, one of the things that the plan already allows is for mixed-use development in some of these different areas. And so that means basically you might have some supporting residential uses adjacent to or within some of these areas. And so instead of just calling it commercial, we're calling it mixed-use commercial. It doesn't change anything underlying. It's just a name thing in terms of being clear about what you mean in the plan. So that entire strip there along Highway 95 is now shown as mixed-use commercial instead of commercial nodal. Any concerns or comments on that part?
I just have one question. I noticed by the entrance to Sarah Park, across the highway, there appears to be 2 half-circle areas. What are those?
That was one of the things we wanted to talk to you about. You're jumping to all of the next things, so that's good. Yeah. So Stu and I were just discussing this the other day. This is something that's actually it's a carryover from the old plan, but the question is, should it still be there? One of the reasons for that is that if you recall on the previous plan, there was the dashed bypass line that was very vague going around the community, and that discussion is still ongoing with ADOT, as you know. So the actual alignment of that, where it's going to intersect with Highway 95, is still a question. And my understanding is that node really emerged from the fact of if we had a connection there in the future, you may want or you may get pressure for some commercial in that location. How does this group feel about showing that? Is it something you think should be, there's two ways to handle that. You either kind of proactively do it in anticipation of something like that, or you wait and see if the highway ever materializes, and then you have the discussion then. It's really a matter of kind of what your long-term vision is. I think it's fair to say that, if that were to occur in the future, that you would probably likely get some interest in that. However, you have these other areas that you're trying to strengthen and fortify as well. So the brown is high density residential. So I think the original concept was that you'd have a mixed use node there, conceivably taking advantage of Sarah Park proximity and kind of some of those things as well. So but the questions on the table, and we definitely wanted to bring it to this group, is what should we show in this particular update of the plan for that area? Keep it the same, move the location, or make it all commercial. I mean, there's a few different options there. Anyone have insights on that, Dan?
Again, I always have to make the disclaimer that I haven't been here very long, but I've heard enough to make me think. And one of the things I get, especially as we move forward with the field assessment study and the possible implementation of the Sarah Park master plan with a sports complex of some kind, is that we've got quite a few facilities out there that are fairly large noise generators. I understand that's been an issue in the past to a certain extent. Well, I can tell you, for example, there was a recent thorough review about relocating the RC planes, just for example. Well, it says in our agreement that, well, guess what? If you relocate us, you, city, have to help us do this financially. Well, that's fine. So what happened is that the RC planes folks came back, they gave us essentially what would be the bill for relocation. Well, I don't think that we could afford it. So what happened is that I was then told to say, well, guess what? You don't have to move. Well, that makes me think about what the Sarah Park master plan is going to be like. And is it really going to be able to be implemented? And the other thing, of course, is mitigation of the complaints from the neighbors. And obviously, I think most of us know that most of those facilities out at Sarah Park were there long before those houses were. And so to put in more high-density houses near there, I can't help but think that, unless you're really willing to invest in somehow relocating these people, is just going to make, is going to be problems in the future. That's all.
So what Dan's suggesting is, maybe the residential component of that doesn't make sense. Others' thoughts on that? I see some nods.
We've been talking about a bypass for the last umpteen years, ever since I've been here at least. And the fact of the matter is there's just no money for it. It's an extremely expensive route going through mountains and all kinds of stuff like that. We can't seem to agree on where the road is going to go, among other things. And so I don't really see it's a problem one way or the other. It's just not going to happen.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I think that Dan was just mentioning whether it's even practical to think of it, but as Dean's saying, whether it's practical or not, the marketplace will determine whether or not it happens.
I think also you have to consider that if if Sarah Park is there and all the things are there and the people choose to build there, you know, it's kind of, they chose that. Obviously, you want to look well before you buy. So
Sure.
I don't think we should necessarily say we can't build there because it might be noisy. You know, maybe it's going to be a community of RC people that will love it. Who knows? So, something.
Have thoughts on that? So I'm not sure I'm hearing a clear direction on that area. I mean, it sounds like there's a couple different options on the table. We either leave it the same and have that conversation down the road when the time comes, either the road or a potential development. And it's just wanting to make sure you guys are comfortable with either of those options. It doesn't sound like there's much appetite to kind of try to figure out another location or do much there. And I'm hearing kind of two sides to either keep it as a mixed use opportunity, and people who build there will kind of know what their location is. The other proposal was to get rid of the residential component, but keep in mind, even if we call it commercial, that still allows for some residential. So it's less obvious on the map if we show it that way. So how about we do a quick, since this is kind of a big thing for the map, I want to make sure we've got clear direction here. So those in favor of just leaving it the same for now, quick show of hands. Okay. All right. Well, that makes that easy. Thank you.
There's only one other thing you could probably spend weeks analyzing this and come up with new stuff, but a big picture is what we're all giving it right now. And big picture, I just wonder if there was a place in this section to address the eventual, there are areas of our community that have been developed, I think, in low, which are just inappropriate uses, commercial, industrial type development in areas that ought to be resort. I didn't see that in here. Is there any, at least tacit approval for the city to work to try to mitigate, or agencies to mitigate some of those areas and bring them to a higher eventual use? The island, if everything's going to stay the way it is, but eventually one day it might be that we look at having some of our industrial facilities maybe relocated to other areas where that property might be more of a attractive area as you're going along the waterfront and stuff. Has any been thought given to that at all?
Hasn't been a lot of discussion in the last two meetings about that particular issue. Where we have had quite a bit of discussion is just that the general concept of infill and revitalization is something that, as given the community's constraints, one area in particular I would point you to on page 33 of the land use section has the land use classifications, and where that really comes through, I think, in some of your comments, Doug, is in the resort classifications. And I think while there's recognition that there are feasibility issues related to ownership, et cetera, I think the concept of what could be there ultimately is really reflected in those resort land use categories. It talks about higher intensity uses, particular to the island, and that was really kind of based on those earlier discussions. It talks about access to the shoreline, et cetera. So that's the primary place where those are addressed. In terms of the industrial uses, right now we've got a lot of that area is shown as resort related, which kind of leaves it a little more open-ended in terms of acknowledging that while something may be a fairly low intensity industrial use today, that there are other opportunities that might come to play in the future. So I think it's kind of sprinkled throughout, but I think those two things, to me, I think get at what you're talking about in terms of wanting to just make it clear that what's out there today isn't necessarily what's always going to be there. Is that fair to say, or is there something else specific?
Probably makes it more palatable to our voters who will eventually be hopefully taking positive action on this. So probably the right way to address it.
Okay. Other questions, comments on land use, map, or policies?
On page 27,
Oh, yep. Page 27.
Yeah, page 27. If somebody would explain what multimodal conductivity is to me, I don't understand that explanation there. That's LU 26D.
Sure. No, that's a good point of clarification. And what multimodal means is just that it accommodates cars, bikes, pedestrians, so that you've got, if you've got, and in this particular instance, in Gateway Corridor, basically if you had one commercial property that's built right next to another, you should be able to get from one parking lot to the next, so you don't have to go out on your roadways, and you should be able to flow pretty well between different uses that are similar, if that makes sense. Does that help, or did I confuse it more?
Let me just ask you, typically when I hear the term multimodal used, I'm under the definition I've heard bannered about is when you can connect different types of transportation all in the same place. Bike riders can show up, drop their car off, and then they can get on a bus and go somewhere else, et cetera. And so are you using it in that sense, or are you using it in a different sense?
I think we're using it, in this particular instance, it's used more broadly to just and maybe we should just say connectivity. I mean, basically, that's what this is about, is just that you need to have connections between uses as they occur for overall flow within the community. We can say that, Dean. I think if it's not making sense, we should change it. So, the circulation chapter talks more about different modes and, kind of all the different roles and we've talked about that, how bikes fit in, how peds fit in. So we don't need to rehash that, but we can make that clarification. It's really just about connections. Let me flag a couple other tweaks that were made on the map, just so that you're aware. One is, if you look at your shoreline and island map, so you can see just south of the label Beachcomber Boulevard out there on the island, we now have a designation for medium density residential. The time the last plan was done, there was no firm timeline in terms of how that development was going to play out. So this is another case of call it what it is. This is now nearly fully built out, if not too far behind. So that was changed to reflect what the actual use is and reinforce that. I think that's just looking kind of quickly here. We've also pulled out all of the public, quasi-public uses, so all of the schools and whatnot, for some reason, were shown as parks on an earlier map. So the blue spots you see are public property or schools. So the ASU campus, for example, the Mojave Community College campus, they're now reflected more clearly as what they are. And then if you flip back over to your overall map, there were also some tweaks up near the airport to reflect, again, just changes that have happened that really weren't contemplated previously. So kind of south and around the airport, you see there's now more of an employment designation. Some of that was shown as open space and parks previously. The Agave Business Park, for example, is now more clearly reflected in terms of what's intended there and kind of on the surrounding area. So that's another change from our earlier map. And then just to the south of that, you see kind of a red finger that comes down with a green arm coming off of it, and that's right along Highway 95. And if you visualize that area, there's a really wide wash that goes through there. Fairly challenging area, but I think the recognition that ultimately someone may wish to do some additional commercial development along there. The green finger is simply representing that, there are going to be some, there needs to be consideration about the wash being there, connections to other open space in the community. So that was changed from residential previously, I believe. So any questions or concerns about any of those land use changes? Okay. So why don't we, if there aren't any other comments on the land use section, why don't we take a quick break? Everybody can grab some lunch. I didn't realize that it had gotten late so quickly. So let's get you some food, and we'll continue the conversation on the economy chapter. Let's turn to page 49, and this is the new economy chapter, and this is one that the plan previously did have some discussion of economic development, but the one of the new requirements is for an economic development element as a standalone element in the plan. And so this section draws from that previous discussion, but it's also been expanded a fair amount to address some of the different things that have emerged in the community. One thing I should want to note on this section, we got some feedback this morning just in terms of there's a lot of different organizations that are involved in this topic in the community. I was reminded this morning the Partnership for Economic Development is very much alive and well, and we've misstated that in here, so we'll take care of that. And, I think just wanting to clarify the different roles and responsibilities for some of the different organizations. But one of the things we really did want to do is just represent that there are a lot of different groups that participate in different aspects of economic development, and that really, they're all important, and I think, we want to be sure that we're reflecting that. So, couple themes, I think, throughout the discussions with the community and with this group, certainly, ongoing diversification of the employment base has been a focus. We talked a little bit about tourism this morning, and that clearly plays a role in this section. But I think one that really reflects both not just the tourism aspect, but also the quality of life of the community and kind of the reflection of the city as a whole is this notion of Lake Havasu as kind of a regional center. Your location really means that you function as the shopping hub, the recreational hub. There's a lot of different things that happen here, and so one of the goals kind of touches on that. Healthcare, kind of the center for a lot of places in the region. So with that, really just want to get this group's take on kind of the range of topics, the range of policy topics that are addressed. Have we missed something? Are there other groups that we've missed or mischaracterized? This is a chance to kind of get your feedback on this information.
I'll jump right in there.
Okay.
One of the areas that I've kind of been having back and forth feelings on is diversifying the city's economic base.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact is we've been working on diversifying economic base for a long time. I mean, if you go back to McCulloch's original vision, he brought us factories here. We were talking about trying to have a diversified economy. But the whole original vision, was about this resort community, a first-class destination where people recreate and have outdoor fun. And all the trappings of all the things that McCulloch brought here since his death and since his company's been spun off and stuff have gone away. And there hasn't been anything really to come in and replace them. And we do have a thriving medical industry, which is supportive of a population our size and of a resort kind of community. And there are things like education system, which you very much need has been enhanced, but I just don't know if diversifying the city's economic base, it sounds good on paper, and maybe that's what we need to tell people who are going to be voting on this thing, that's what we're trying to do, but the fact is it seems kind of unrealistic, and it also seems impractical, and it certainly hasn't occurred. So I'm just wondering, I know if I was like a portfolio manager and I had a bunch of stocks, and I'm looking at the performers and the non-performers, I mean, it seems to me like you run with your winners, and you do everything you can to support them, and then you kind of drop off the ones that aren't so much. And I just wonder if really we go back to that vision statement that the council adopted many years ago, which is being a first-class resort destination, if that really is not ultimately what it's all about, and it's industries like boating and other things that play to that industry, maybe that's what we should be doing and not trying to be something that we're not. And if that's not even throwing our money away off, trying to be something that we're not. I'll throw that out there.
Let me give you a little bit of context. There was definitely some discussion about that question, the issue early on in these meetings, and I think a couple different angles on that. I mean, certainly folks, I think what I heard was a recognition that, there's not going to be, I think there's an acknowledgement that there's not going to be great diversification. You're not going to be attracting, a new high-tech business park, for example. People seem to kind of get that and kind of acknowledge that. But what we did hear that I think is important to recognize as part of that community vision is that, it was about resort, it was about that, but we also heard folks talking about, kind of the ability for people who grew up here to stay here and sort of what opportunities are there. So while it may not be on a large scale, the question I would put back to this group is, is some diversification of your economy something that should be encouraged? And because really that's what this is about. This is a policy that the city should continue to seek. And I think, provided it's not over, kind of saying we're gonna seek, 5 Fortune 500 companies over the next 10 years. Is that fair, or do you think that's misleading, as Doug's saying, in terms of what can actually be accomplished? There's other ways to diversify the economy, small businesses, lots of other things that could play into that really aren't kind of large scale, if that makes sense. What do others think about that?
Well, there's one thing that's quite apparent in the population of Havasu is that we do have a significant part of our population that does not want to change. They want it just like it was when they got here. And they're very vocal. And so when you start talking about making big changes, you always get that resistance. Now, we try to strike a balance between the two. And but there are some things that are kind of self-eliminating. Heavy industry, for example, forget that. That's not going to happen. And either now or 20 years from now. But there are some other things that we can go after, and PED is very active in trying to recruit those clean industries. Although cashing of Social Security checks is probably the cleanest industry we have.
Other thoughts on this topic? This is this is a big shift. I want to make sure we're getting all the angles here.
Well, just from a rhetorical standpoint, and from a being very specific, I wonder if the nurturing of existing business and the encouragement of new businesses in the community is a little bit different than diversifying the city's economic base. I mean, I think that's what PED is really doing, is it's trying to help businesses that are here grow, keeping them from moving away, and also trying to, maybe when an occasional prospect comes along, trying to get them to relocate here. But there's no widespread effort to go out here and create a technology park or create a rail spur here or do something that would enhance our economic base. So we can leave it in there, but I'm just saying it's sort of like,
Clarify what it means.
I mean, if we really want a document that says something, but if we just want something that's general that the voters will go, oh yeah, that sounds great, let's vote on it, great, leave it in there. But I just don't think it's helpful or it's even genuine to what the purposes of what we should be trying to do are.
Obviously, most of us came here because of we like the weather, or we like the lake or the mountains and the desert and so forth. And I know that this is a huge recreational, but we do have to have more than just that. And I think that we have to continue to look at what we can do. Bringing ASU in and getting graduates and getting more kids here, developing studies where they can come in and they can do the IT. You don't need a railroad for IT. You know, I think that computer companies, things like that, I mean, my God, if they had their main offices here, you know, if there were an airport coming in that were closer, who wouldn't want to live here and fly back to the manufacturing company? I just think that a lot of people aren't aware of us. You know, you're in Phoenix and, you know, you say, well, you know, I'm from Lake Havasu. Oh, really? Where's that? Honestly? And so it's getting the word out of who we are. We can do a lot of industry. We were at the industrial park in Kingman with the railroad spur coming in there, and that literally they can ship from the East Coast merchandise to Kingman and then put it on a truck from Kingman to Havasu, and it's cheaper than trucking all the way from the East Coast. So we have the availability of getting manufacturing here, but people aren't aware of that. We have to make them aware, and I think that we have to be diversified. We have to have jobs for our kids after they graduate and after they've attended college if we want to continue to grow in a way that's not just, spring break. And many of the people that don't want the city to grow, spring break is one of their primary concerns. But if we don't have spring break, we don't have anything, really. Tourism is our main industry, but I think we should work to do more.
Anyone else on that one? Let's keep moving. Other comments or questions on this section? Looks like actually Dorothy's got a question over here.
No, I was just going to say that we have ASU here now and MCC, and realistically, we don't have anything to keep these young people here. And I don't know what can be done to create businesses or jobs to keep them here. And I don't think Lake Havasu is the only one having those problems, but it would be nice if there would be some way we could find to change it so young people will stay.
Okay. Other comments, questions on this section? Are there things that are missing, you think, that ought to be here that you aren't seeing?
Go out. And I'm going to give a disclaimer again. I'm not a liberal. I just want you to know that, okay? But I can't help but think that as I watch national news and I watch my wife try to get a job here who's been successfully employed for 20 years and she can't even get a bite, I have to think about, well, what's happening here? How come? We look at the jobs that are available. They're paid maybe $8, $9, $10 an hour. Maybe we should look at cities like Seattle that have taken a look at their minimum wage and have increased those so that people that work in the service industry is what a lot of people in resort towns do, that might be something that we could look at. Is looking at our minimum wage, I can tell you from a Parks and Rec standpoint that the subsidy level that we give, especially to the after-school program, is tremendous. Because those folks can't otherwise afford childcare. Well, how come? Well, because they're making $8, $9 an hour. Anyway, just something to think about.
Oh,
Well, since my main charge is marketing the city for tourism, I'll just kind of turn to the tourism section, goal EC 1.3 on page 52, and just point out a couple things. First, if you look at the very last point, public lands, we're getting right back to the whole issue of working with the state land department. And really, I hope there's some way we can look at getting out of leasing to state land and just let folks buy stuff. But if we're going to only be working on trying to facilitate leases, there's leases will be expiring after 2015, and probably just focusing it just on leases expiring in 2015 is much too small of a time frame, because there's most folks out there are getting on 5-year leases and it's going to be 2020 again, and there's ones in between, and so just leases, period. Secondly, we talk about as a goal to promote tourism, and yet there's a lot of things that the CVB does to promote tourism that aren't mentioned here. And I don't know if they belong here, but certainly advertising our community, it makes us aware not only to folks who might come as visitors, but also to those businesses that might want to relocate here. That's how they become aware of our community, by the advertising we're doing. There's a lot of benefits associated with it. And I could run through a whole list of things that the CVB does to market our community or promote our community that aren't listed here. And so I don't know how many of them are appropriate, but that could be a homework assignment for me, is to come back with a laundry list of some of those other things that maybe do belong in there, that any city that relies upon tourism as its bread and butter ought to be doing to market itself and promote itself here.
I can't resist. I'm sorry. I'm also on the governing board of JTAG Wave, as is James. Skybox, so just give you an example of things that are happening that a lot of people don't know about. Skybox Restaurant was purchased. We're putting about $1.2 million into it. It'll be a culinary center. And one of the things, and also business classes, as well as tourism and hospitality. And one of the reasons why I'm bringing that up is the focus of the school board in doing this is not just training for jobs, but training for jobs that we believe will be here. So we can, like you had said, we can focus on keeping some of the kids here. And my point is, it's a reality. It's happening. And it's, if you drive by and take a look at construction, it's kind of fun seeing it go in. And those are the kinds of things that it's one of those, if you build them, they will come. As I understand, there's already a waiting list for classes because they're already getting maxed out. So I'd like to encourage more of that, and the city was a great help in helping us expedite and get it done. So there are things like that going on in Lake Havasu.
Yeah, I just want to second that. I mean, I think that the city is more than willing to work with developers, contractors. I know the legislature is working on changing the public lands so that, we can get our public lands back. So all that is, it's coming. We're making progress with it. But I think that we can't ignore that people don't know us, and I think what Doug does, I mean, his the video, the information, the web pages they've put out are great, and I think it shows wonderful recreation, all the recreation. I just think it would be great to show, as our city, a great ASU where the kids can get their education. And if they're out of state, the deal is a great deal for them. This is still a great place for the parents to have a place to come to see the kids. I mean, we just have to work towards letting more people know we're here and that opportunities are available if they'll just call us and talk to us, if they have something they're looking at. And I know that there have been businesses that have come to the city and they want a building they can move into that's huge. Well, we don't have that available, but we're working with changing laws so that, contractors can build and they don't get charged until, the building's rented, so that they're not paying these astronomical prices for an empty building. But at least when business comes to us and says, I need this much and I need it in, 3 months, boom, it's available. Come on in. Otherwise, they keep passing us over. So I think what Doug has done is great as far as recreation, and there is so much that he does for the whole city, and I just see it growing, working better.
I know one of the challenges of this section is that in our prior general plan, we didn't have the economic development addressed in it. So we're starting from scratch. So it's a noble effort to get something on the table and scratch something out that we can put in front of our taxpayers and have them all agree this is what we need to do to develop our city. But I do think this section probably needs a lot more work, and I'm as guilty as anybody because I didn't send it in, and I'm sorry about that. But I'm just thinking about right now we're working on developing an economic development plan for the city. There isn't one right now in place. And when I think about some of the things that are very important to our city, and maybe developing an economic development plan is an important thing to do, if we're going to talk about economic development, but workforce training is looked at by everybody on our team working on this project is our number one issue. We don't have the skills, we don't have the soft skills, we don't have a lot of those things. The second thing we've looked at is this a major problem is we don't have air service connections. And as Dorothy was mentioning earlier, we do need air service. That's important to economic development. We also, as much as we may overlook it, our name is Lake Havasu City, and I know that other agencies have jurisdiction over the lake, but in fact, we have to recognize that our lifeblood is dependent upon the lake. And I think that has to be addressed in a major way in this document, is talking about we can't just sit by and wait for somebody else to do something when it comes to that lake. We're lucky to have a marine association now that gets involved in things like quagga mussels, and gets involved in things like limited ramp access, that sorts of things. But all those things go back to the very heart of our economy. And so I think this document needs to recognize in a major way that keeping up with the lake, maintaining the lake, being an advocate for the lake, fighting fiercely for that lake is very much a part of what this city needs to be charged with doing. Because if we lost that lake, let's say they just blew up the Parker Dam and it just drained it, what would Lake Havasu City be after that? I would suggest probably we'd have a great outflow of residents.
We'd have Jeep tours under the bridge.
And I think those are all good points, Doug, and I would, welcome any feedback you have on that. I think,
part of the blame, a lot of the blame, I'm saying all these things, I should have done something about them before now.
well, we hadn't had anything to look at before now, so this is a place to start. I think the workforce development one is one that we did flag, the airport, but it sounds like we can expand on those, and,
I've got a list of 26 different issues that are related to economic development that we're looking at now as part of putting together this.
oh yeah, you gotta use the mic.
Let me go back to the beginning. In Genesis, there was, okay, never mind. I was just saying that right now we are working on a prize competition, America's Best Communities, and part of that is developing this economic development plan. And so far, we've identified 26 different issues related to economic development, and I'd be happy to share that list with you. All of them potentially could be used as elements that you develop under key issues and opportunities. But developing an economic development plan is certainly probably gets to the heart of it too. Just like
Well, that's
we
a
have
great one.
we have a promotional plan for the city that the Bureau does every year, and so.
Okay, yeah, and I think keep in mind, the distinction between the economic development plan and this, and sort of higher level versus lower level. So I think wherever we can weave those things, that's probably great. But I think there probably will be some things that are too detailed, depending on what you have in mind. But we should look at those and see where we can fold stuff in.
Well, this is a macro 25,000
Okay.
feet in the air document, but
Okay.
even so, there's some things looking down from space that we need to probably address that aren't here.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Other comments, questions on this section? All right, last one, and that is the implementation section, which starts on page 81. Oh, wait, sorry. 85. And this is something the current plan really doesn't have. There isn't really a place to go in terms of, if you just joined city council and you want to see kind of what are some of the things we're focusing on at the general plan level. We don't have kind of that go-to place right now. So the goal of this section is really that this would be the most living part of this document, that this is something that the city can kind of come back to. It's a way to help structure what needs to be done and kind of general timeframes for things to help implement the general plan. Granted, there are going to be many other documents and efforts that are going on, but I think this is really meant to be just the umbrella document of are we kind of working together in all these different arenas to accomplish our goals. And so you can see starting on page 86, the action plan matrix basically goes through each of the guiding principles and calls out some of the things that were, at least as based on an initial skim, we felt were worth discussing as particular actions to support the implementation of the plan. One thing to note, and Jim actually flagged this earlier, the priorities. There are a number of different types of actions that might be in here. Some of them are programs, some of them are ongoing discussions and coordination efforts. A number of them you'll see relate to the development code. And so there's, as you know, work going on on the development code update right now. So we're working closely with them to make sure that, so a lot of these things will get taken care of within the next year as part of that process. So that if it seems like there's a lot of ones on here, that's part of why. But we wanted to flag those things so that you're aware, A, that they're happening, but also I think in some ways it's a little bit of a quick win here in terms of a lot of these things will be able to get checked off relatively quickly. So couple questions for you guys. I think obviously if there are things that should be on this list that aren't, we want to hear that. If you think you disagree with what's on here, have questions, let us know. I think another area we're still kind of working through the refinements is on the kind of the who's the lead and who are the partners. And obviously in anything that we talk about in the community, the city plays a major role, bigger in some areas and smaller in other areas. And so we try to provide some foundation for how those different actions might happen and who would be involved in that. So there's still some work to be done there. And then the last thing I would mention is that we have a placeholder here for what we're calling a summary of priority initiatives. And what we see this as is really kind of your top 5 or top 10, whatever those most important things are from this list that you think really ought to be elevated to a real focus over the next year or two for the city. And so it's helpful to have the kind of the longer laundry list, but it's also really important to kind of boil that down and give the city another layer of focus in terms of kind of moving the plan to the next level. So with that, I'll stop talking and be curious to hear from you. Don, you've been quiet because you were looking at the wrong stuff, but you want to jump in?
Okay, I've been kind of quiet tonight because
Oh, hold on, Don, it looks like the mic's off, actually. Bill says.
Okay. I've been kind of quiet on this tonight because I prepared by studying the wrong chapter. I was unable to download the attachment on the email and I misfigured it. So you will be getting a written report from me on this. But I agree with most everything that was said there today. When Doug was talking about this not being a Sun City, I certainly agree with that. I've been retired for 24 years, but I voluntarily work with the young people on a full-time basis, and that's my thing. And I agree with Dorothy with what was said about particularly about the public transportation. I think that is a mistake that needs to be corrected. I notice in here we've got to do more to encourage ASU and MCC to grow and participate in our community. Unfortunately, that tourism is a big thing in our city, but unfortunately most jobs in tourism are not the college graduate job. We've got to look at getting industry and business here that will get those more of those type of jobs. I notice in here on wayfinding, and I do have to say I do not agree with that. I think there's much excess money being spent on wayfinding that could be spent elsewhere. The only thing I would like on that is it disturbs me that I do not see any sign on Highway 95 saying that ASU is here. And I don't think we need wayfinding for that. I think that should be a state thing. It's a state highway. Other places I go to, I see signs for the colleges and universities. We don't have one. That's wrong. As I say, I will be giving you further information as I get into this. Thank you.
Donna?
I'll jump in there again if I can. I had a couple comments I want to make, but just to address some things Don said. The funny thing about wayfinding is everybody says it's such a waste of money. We're going to spend $500,000 on signs. We're spending $4 million, I think, in next year's budget just to maintain the roads. It's a small expense, but everybody always says to me, I think it's a waste of time. But if you could do a sign for Rotary Park just to show the kids where the skateboard park is, or if you could just do a sign to show people where the channel is, or if you could just do a sign to tell people how to get onto the island, or if you could just do a sign to tell people where the London Bridge is, or if you could just do a sign for ASU. Everybody always says it's a waste of money, but, and I think the thing is when you look at the signs we're doing, it's not a waste of money when you look at it in aggregate. We put the most important signs out there. But anyway, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I respect yours, Don. The second thing I would like to say is we did leave out MCC out of this document. It seems that we did talk a lot about ASU, and ASU is definitely important. It's definitely our future deal, but maybe there might be some way to address the,
Making a
as
note
you were
of
saying.
that as Don
I
was
meant to say
talking.
that earlier, and I just slipped my mind, so really good point. And then the last two things I wanted to ask were, in terms of the immediate priorities action plan that you were talking about putting together, I just wondered about the need for it, in that this is not going to get in front of voters for a couple years yet anyway, and so by the time it might get voted upon, the timeline for that is already passed for those priorities. And then the last thing I was going to ask is this, is, we brought up a lot of, I think, really interesting and important points today in this group, and I'm sure the others have as well, and I was just wondering what kind of processes in place to make sure that the things that have been brought up are addressed in this plan, or how's it made a decision as to whether, well, you brought up MCC, will it get in there or not, or you brought up the retirement community, or whatever it is. How do we get from having talked about it, knowing that is there some kind of, are comments being, everything that's brought up in these meetings addressed, and then we
We
get a
are
point by
tracking all the comments. I think, we are relying on this group to kind of be the cross-check. We're going to bring you, we've brought you drafts. There's as revised drafts happen, I would expect that you ought to be taking a look at those and make sure that, I think if there's something that we don't think is realistic to address, or, as with the map earlier, if I feel like we really need, one way or another, we'll prod you for that. But I think you ought to see your comments reflected generally. If there's a reason why we can't address them, we'll let you know, or we think that there's not really kind of a strong feeling in the group, and there are going to be some of those. So I think we're trying to blend a lot of different opinions, a lot of different interests in the community throughout this process, and so I think we're trying to take all of that into account, and, is every single comment that's been made going to end up in the final draft? Probably not, but we're trying to balance that and do the best we can in terms of the interests of the community. So,
like the comment I made about diversified economy being sort of unrealistic, but it is an aspirational document, and I guess I get that as well. And that would be really nice to have my kid have a place where she could work, and everybody's place. It's probably unrealistic to think we're going to be able to do it, but maybe it does belong in here because that's what our hope and our dreams are. So this is as much of an action plan as it is. This is what we hope and want, but whether it will actually happen or not. Yeah.
I think that's a good example, Doug, of a comment where, I think you had a pretty strong opinion one way, but I think I heard clearly from other folks that, we think it's important. And so I think the way I would handle that is we will try to clarify in the document there are some specific things that can be done, make it clear that, what it's not about. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's a 10 to 20 year plan, and that's something the community, I'm hearing, still wants to work towards. So that's kind of how but I think it's a fair question, and I think that's kind of how we're trying to balance these things. So if there's something that clearly we have consensus on, great, but there are going to be some we just don't, and that's how we have to kind of move forward. So is that fair? Okay.
I just wanted to say one quick thing. It says by the year 2040, we have the potential to grow by another 14,000 population. We might as well target who we want that audience, that population to be. And if we want it to be our own children and families, because to be able to enjoy what we have, then that's great. That's what we should shoot for. I know that you were both saying that economic development program that you guys are working on right now. And people come, they take a look at us, and then they pass us by because we can't offer what these other big cities offer. But I just want to remind you, when we have new families come here, one of the reasons they come is because we offer them what the big cities can't offer. It's for that exact reason they come. And I guess when you really believe in something like I believe in Lake Havasu City and what it is we give our families, you ask any one of our new parents, our parents that come here, there is nowhere where they've ever lived where they have a community that gives them an after-school program affordable and at this caliber. We won best in the state for our after-school program, Little Lake Havasu City. Okay, we have a kinder swim program where every 5-year-old goes to swim lessons for free by this city. Puts them through that. I mean, there are things, maybe a door prize. I don't know. I don't know what else to tell these big corporations other than everything else will come. The transportation, we're working on that. But with their help, we'll get it. But right now, what we can offer them is something no one else can. And we maybe go to these big corporations and to try to talk them into coming to Havasu because we show them we've got something nobody else does.
I just have one comment about the wayfinding. I feel that in this day and age, and we're working 10 years in advance, everybody has a GPS in their car. But in 10 years, I don't either. But in the next 10 years, everybody's going to have a GPS. And my kids when they come, they just bring out their little whatever, tap it, and it tells them what restaurants to go to, what stores to go to, and how to get there. And my feeling with Lake Havasu and all the money they want to put to wayfinding, I think the money could be used better somewhere else.
My question for you guys on that topic, and I know this is one where we've got a lot of different opinions. I think the question is, in a 10 to 20 year plan, do you think this is something the city should be working on? Take out of the picture sort of exactly how much it's going to cost, when it's going to happen. Is that something that is important over the long term to the community? Does that change it, or is it sort of the same for everyone?
Like I said, I think the technology
Beyond that.
is going to change it. It's going to be something that is going to be easier for someone when they're driving into Lake Havasu. Well, where am I going to go? They can just pop a button and it'll tell them where to go.
As far as long-term, this is a short-term program. It's something that's going to happen when? A couple of years at the most? Yeah. So we're not talking about a 10 or 20-year thing.
I'll just point out that we're being futurists in this room. If any of us were that great at it, we'd be probably working somewhere else making a lot of money doing it. I mean, it was 20 years ago they signaled the death knell of daily newspapers, and yet over the last 30 years, out of 1,740 newspapers, there's still 1,440 of them still in business. So maybe there's less people reading it, but the fact is people still use them, and wayfinding signs are important, and they have a whole lot more value than just telling existing residents where they are about it. It goes back to economic development. It's in the right section. So anyway, this is not probably the forum to debate it. It's a great project, and when you look at how $500,000 might be allocated in our total capital development budget of $28.5 million, it's a pittance. And if anything got the scrutiny that this thing had gotten, we'd be sitting around for weeks wringing our hands over the different items that are in our economic development budget now, or in our capital development plan.
Okay, Donna?
The wayfinding is probably one of the hardest things we've dealt with as far as the council's concerned. I know that that people feel both ways strongly about this. I was on Tuesday. I was in Phoenix, driving to a meeting, the medical board that I serve on, and there were several accidents. And I do have the GPS in my car. And it did tell me exactly where to go. But along the way, there were signs saying the Riverwalk or ASU Tempe and, different things that weren't on my GPS. Now, if you've got someone else in the car that can be working the GPS while you're driving, that's cool. But if you're alone and you're, following the directions of your GPS, you can't really look at those. You go into a town, you see that there's an art museum that features something you like. You see that there's, Sarah Park way out there. Half the people don't know there's a park out there. So, I just think that for businesses and for pleasure, it's good to know. I know that the number one question or number two question at the visitor center, which is right under the London Bridge, is where's the London Bridge? It's right there. So, it's even though we're here, we know where we're going, what we're doing, we have to look at it with new eyes. And we haven't even gotten the bids yet, so we don't know exactly what it's going to cost. So that's another thing. Before we, just absolutely put our foot down, I think we need to get all of the information, come to the meetings that they're doing, the outreach about wayfinding. And God, I sound like Doug now. But at any rate, it's a tough decision because I hear you, and I hear you too, Don. And I'm here to represent the people, so I take that into consideration.
Anyone, Don, I'm sorry, Dan weigh in first, and then we'll come back to Doug.
On page 89, on chapter 8, open space and recreation, I see the priority ratings, and I see that we have a 1 by exploring the potential cost benefits of expanding the use of city parks and facilities for tournaments and other events. I get that. I see that as an economic engine for tourism here, getting teams to visit, filling up the hotels, all that. I get that, but I can't help but think that and I'll use the aquatic center as an example. We have a 20-plus-year-old facility that is starting to show its wear. And I can't help but think that based on some of the experience I've had so far to try to keep that just up and running, that really the item above that about identifying and pursuing funding resources to either expand our parks or to build and maintain sports fields or to keep the aquatic center going, I can't help but think that almost is more important than the one that's got a number 1 on it. Because with the money, we can do all that stuff. And so I can't help but think at least what should happen is that there should be 1 by the funding resources, because without the money, we're not going to go anywhere except try to maintain the status quo.
That's a great point, and I think I wouldn't mistake the ongoing reference as sort of meaning that it's not important. I think what it acknowledges is that not only is that a priority right now, it's going to remain a priority, I would anticipate, over the long term. So maybe it's 1, but it really ultimately is going to be something that's an ongoing challenge. So good point. Other comments, questions on? I know we're running out of time here. On the action plan, something that you thought ought to be in here that you don't see, or other things that you disagree with? And I think what I'd like to do, particularly with this section, and I think Doug makes a good point, maybe the notion of the short list is not realistic given the timing of kind of the adoption process. So that's something we'll give some thought, talk to staff about in terms of what would be most helpful. But I really would like each of you to please take some time over the next week or so, take a look at this, through the lens of your interests and your focus in the community, and let us know kind of what we've missed and if there are other ideas that you have. And our timing from here is that we have the draft available online. We will make a few updates probably following these meetings and repost it next week. But we've got an online survey up there, so anyone can get on, review the draft, provide comments. We're going to leave that open probably I would say first week of January, just to give people enough time. We'll do another round of social media blasts, et cetera, try to get people to it. But if you can help us get the word out that this is now, we have a full draft, now's the time to look at it, that would be really helpful. In terms of meetings with this group, what we're proposing, and we'll get back to you with specific dates, is that we will do one, you will get a revised draft following that comment period. We will do one more meeting with this group, probably in the February to March timeframe, and we'll confirm that here as quickly as we possibly can. But we'll do it as a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, and we need to do, and we actually need to do two hearings, Stu. So we'll do one in the evening and one in the afternoon. So, we would like to have as many folks from the committee there as possible to talk with the commission and just kind of share your feedback as we go forward. But we'll make sure you have time before then to take a look at it and get familiar with what's there, how your comments were reflected, that sort of thing. But from that point, the document will then, assuming we get through the Planning Commission hearings, would go to council sometime in April probably, and then it's going to go quiet a little bit until the election happens. And so that's kind of tentatively what we're looking at right now. But right now is kind of the critical period for this process because we really want to get as much feedback as we can. And frankly, our public turnout has been lighter than we would like to see. So we could use your help in rounding people up and getting them to pay attention to this very important process. So thank you.
Fresh my memory. When again is it on the ballot? And
There isn't a firm date set, but I believe it's going to be late 2015. Is that right, Stu?
Yeah, we haven't really discussed the date.
Okay.
More of a budgeting thing. How much we have in budget.
Okay. To be determined. So.
I would say, is there's any way that since we're recording this, if there's any way maybe at the bottom of the screen that we could put the website address so people who are kind of lurkers out there, who don't like to get out in public meetings and voice themselves, like to stay anonymous, could at least review it. That would be kind of a cool thing to do.
Absolutely. I will talk to Bill after the meeting. So, all right. Well, thank you all for your input, and feel free if you just have a few comments you want to get them to Stu. He's been feeding us information as he goes, and we're compiling all of that. So appreciate the time, and thank you all very much.